Hey guys, welcome to a new video for the channel. My name is Luna and today we're still with the Coldplay album series. It is a series where I review every single album released by Coldplay. We've done Parachutes, we've done Rush of Blood to the Head. That means that today we have X and Y released all the way back in 2005. One of the most controversial releases by Coldplay, this album was the first time that the fandom of the band were divided between two people. The people that thought that this was the best Coldplay album to date and those who did not like the album at all. The reasons why are pretty much obvious. The band obviously took a different approach to songwriting in this album, being way more generic and less risky in some parts. One could say that an album like Parachutes doesn't take many risks either, but the thing is that Parachutes had a sound that, separated Coldplay from the rest of the bands at the time. Even though there were a lot of Radiohead comparisons, the thing is that most of those comparisons came from the fact that alternative rock was greatly inspired by what Radiohead did in early 90s with Pablo Honey and the bands. And then with the Rush of Blood to the Head, they pretty much showed that they had their own sound, and it was nothing like any other sound at the moment, although again, it was alternative rock and there were a lot of alternative rock bands in the early 2000s. So with this album, people were expecting, a new step, a new form of evolution from Coldplay. Since, the difference between Parachutes and A Rush of Blood to the Head was so massive, people were expecting the same kind of thing from this album, But with this album, it was pretty much the opposite, It's like they tried to capitalize the success they had with A Rush of Blood to the Head, crafting songs that use the same structure as many other songs from A Rush of Blood to the Head, this time with less variety and less elegance in the songwriting. It's almost like they sacrificed that sound that, defined them and separated them from the rest of the bands to appeal to more people. As a consequence of that, it kind of worked because X and Y is one of the most well-known albums that Coldplay has ever released. But it was mostly because of the songs that were in the album rather than the album itself. In this album, you can find songs like Talk, Speed of Sound, Fix You, one of the biggest songs from the UK. Songs, that peaked the charts for a long time. Even today, every time that Coldplay releases a new album, some of those songs come back to the billboards and, smash it. Every time that Coldplay releases an album, you can see that, the ghost of the previous sound in the new album. The thing is that never again we saw something similar to X and Y in Coldplay's discography. You can go to the acoustic songs that Coldplay is doing today or in albums like Viva La Vida and Milo Xyloto, and you'll find resemblances with Parachute. You can go to the alternative rock tunes that we're doing in songs like, again, Viva La Vida and Milo Xyloto, and you'll find resemblances to A Rush of Blood to the Head. But what you cannot find is a single song that sounds even similar to what they were trying to do in X and Y, because it's almost like they were not comfortable with the sound that they were taking in at the moment. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is a bad album at all. Actually, I really enjoyed this album, especially, the first time I heard it. I had a great time because if you take the songs individually, if you take the songs outside of the album, it's probably one of the best Coldplay projects. But once you put it in, once you put everything together, it's repetitive and sometimes even boring. Because as I said before, it doesn't really matter what Coldplay album we're talking about. Even if we're talking about the worst albums like Music of the Spheres and Ghost Stories, in my opinion, by the way, you can still find a lot of variety and, changes in the songwriting from the previous albums, even when the album had like a 2-year difference from the previous one. In Ghost Stories, for example, you have songs like A Sky Full of Stars, and then you have Midnight, and then you have Magic. 3 songs that are completely different from one another, but still sound good in the context of the album. And even albums like Parachutes have songs like Spies, and then Sparks, and then We Never Change. 3 songs that, even though are acoustic and you can find resemblance between them, are completely different from one another. With this album instead, it seems like every single song uses the same formula over and over again. Every single song sounds similar, really similar to the previous one. The only thing that really changes is the melody and the instruments that are being played. And I know a lot of people say that, well, it's an album, it's supposed to sound similar because in order to stay cohesive, the album needs to sound somewhat in the same lane of music. But if that's your argument, then you probably, you need to hear more music, because that's not the case at all. Some of the best albums, actually, one of my favorites, for example, the White Album, has a lot of variety in terms of styles, genres, types of performances. Again, I'm not saying that because, the songs are similar to one another, they are bad songs, or there are songs that are just not enjoyable. Completely the opposite. As I said before, if you take the songs individually, I think this is one of their best projects. Songs like Fix You remain one of the most beautiful songs they have ever crafted, and Speed of Sound is one of the most timeless compositions that Chris Martin has ever done. But in order for you to understand my problem with this album, it's almost like for you to understand why compilation albums are, sell a lot of discs. If you look for, the best-selling albums of all time, there will be a lot of compilation albums there, because it's just, it's just a safe option. You're listening to the best songs from that particular artist, or, the best songs from a certain stage of their career. For example, this album's by the Beatles. These albums are actually some of their best-selling albums, apart from the original releases. But when talking about the best albums, in terms of quality, musical quality, you never listen to anyone talking about compilation records, because even though, yes, every single song on those compilation records is amazing, they don't really make sense or just feel odd inside the album. It's pretty much the same with this one, Even though every single song on this album is great, is enjoyable, I can't think of a song that I didn't enjoy. Well, actually, yeah, there are a few. For example, Swallowed in the Sea, which is one of the most sugar-coated and boring ballads. But apart from that song, every single song on this album is enjoyable. I can enjoy it, and I can appreciate the songwriting, the production, the performance, everything in it. But they are so similar to one another that, 20 minutes into the album, I want to fucking kill myself. Especially with songs like What If, which is a beautiful ballad, but it's Chris Martin repeating the same thing over and over again. Nothing changes, nothing escalates, it's just the same thing again and again and again, and it's such a long track too. Long songs are not really a problem as long as you keep it interesting and you build up to something. One of the reasons why I decided to start this channel was because I like to have conversations about music. I've always been open to discussions in, Discord, Twitter. I am really active on Twitter talking about, hot takes on music. And my opinion on this album has always been quite controversial because people don't understand why I don't like it that much. Because again, if I'm saying these bad things about the album, it's basically comparing it to A Rush of Blood to the Head, because the album on its own, it's one of the best releases from 2005 that, that came out of the mainstream. It feels as if Chris Martin, and the whole band felt like they had the responsibility to make an album like this, rather than, them wanting to make an album like this. And I can prove this to you. Why would Viva La Vida sound so different, if not completely different, from this album? There's not a shred of influence from this album in Viva La Vida, because you can only do as much with alternative rock before you start to be repetitive, and apparently Coldplay didn't learn that lesson and crafted this album before going to a more pop thing with Viva La Vida, which in my opinion was a way better album. And the whole band felt more comfortable to the point where they released not only one album but 2 EPs. Even those things, even the side things from this era, from 2008 Coldplay, are better than this album in my opinion. Many of my favorite songs from Coldplay come from this album. For example, Speed of Sound, Talk, Twisted Logic, one of their best songs, definitely a huge underrated gem from this album, a song that breaks the formula that I've been talking about. By the time the Rush of Blood to the Head was released, it seemed like Coldplay could do no wrong. It seemed like they had the monopoly in terms of musical quality and music and popularity. But with the release of X and Y, it showed that the band was struggling to find new ideas, or at least they were struggling to find that new sound that will, make them evolve again into the new Coldplay, the 2010s Coldplay. And even though I think it's a good album, compared to the rest of the things that Coldplay did in the 2000s, it's repetitive, and to me it sounds forced and sometimes even uninspired, like Chris Martin didn't want it to do this album. I like this album, but I can't give this album such a high score considering what Coldplay would do after and what Coldplay was doing before this album. So in terms of rating, this album for me gets a 5. That is it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the videos that I upload. Next up is Viva La Vida, my favorite Coldplay album. I'm really excited to do that review, especially because I think that I have a lot of things that many people don't know about this album. So yeah, I think it will be interesting. Plus, it's always great to have a new purpose to go back to. Amazing music that I love, and this videos give me that purpose. So please, if you have your own opinion about this album, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments. I'll be more than glad to check it out and, you know, have a little discussion with you in the comments, because I know that my opinion on this album isn't really that popular. I know that a lot of people disagree with me in many of the things that I say about this album, especially the repetitiveness part and how this album is a bit boring. But, you know, that disagreement I often have with people that watch my videos is often, you know, it's actually the reason why I started this channel. Even though not many people see my videos, even if it's just one person commenting and, you know, sharing their opinion about something that I said, I'm really grateful for it. So yeah, with that being said, I hope I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.